All right, so we have a great panel coming up here. We have 2 current students and then 5 former students that just graduated. And they're going to be sharing their experiences about EXITO. They're going to be covering about 4 different questions. They each have 5 minutes. And then at the end of the panel, we're going to open it up for Q&A. But some of the things that they're going to be covering are brief description and overview of the research that they conducted, their experience being supported in the research lab, including any challenges they encountered or are encountering, what you wish or what they wish they would have known. And then they're also going to be talking about a little bit tips that they'd like to share with incoming scholars and how to be successful as an undergraduate researcher. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Elle here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eleanor, or Elle, and I'm just going to do a quick little overview of what I do in my lab and how I kind of got there. So I'm on an Alzheimer's disease research project, and as some of you may be familiar with this disease, it's one of the largest growing epidemics in our nation and actually across the world. The cost for care of patients with Alzheimer's disease is currently, well, in 2015 it was $226 billion, and this is on the rise as our baby boomer population is aging. So it's predicted by 2050 we will have 13.8 million people with this disease. So our goal is to hopefully find a cure sometime in here before this epidemic really gets out of hand. So right now there's no way to really prevent or cure this disease. There's a lot of great research going on, but there's no drugs that currently help this disease, so research is quite important. So when tackling this project, we really wanted to ask, what can we target specifically to learn more about the mechanisms and just more about this disease? So this was our brief. I sat down with my PI and we really looked at a set of research goals, and these are goals that our lab has had for a while. I jumped into this project later on, so you can read them yourselves. I'll read them quickly. We wanted to look at the mechanism driving the progression of Alzheimer's disease. It's been studied for 15 years, yet somehow we still don't have a cure, so it's really important to understand what's happening. We wanted to identify the most toxic species of the proteins involved in this disease, develop a drug screening assay to look at the different drugs, because this process is quite slow right now, and then identify different drugs that we can collaborate with people on and develop to look at cures. So, okay, and then where you guys are, when you're looking at finding a mentor, when you look at your RLC placements, I say the best advice is personality really does matter. If you don't mesh well with your PI, it's going to be really hard to get great mentoring advice, and so it really is important to kind of have a feel for what you're looking for in both research and personality of how much kind of pressure you want to have and what type of a person you are. Communicate. It's really important to communicate, when you're going to be gone, if you're going to be late. Just a number of things. I know professionals really appreciate when you communicate clearly, and it definitely looks good on you. And then follow through. I know my mentor is really big on this. Okay, and then what I wish I knew, time commitments, not only my RLC time commitments, they've asked a lot of hours of me. And there's also a lot of Build EXITO time commitments. This is an awesome program, but there are a lot of, there's forums, and we have cohort meetings, and really balancing that with trying to keep your grades up is hard sometimes. One thing I struggle with is email requests. So there's a lot of forms people send you, and if I don't do it right away, I never do it, and then I get on a warning list, and it's a whole mess. So just do things right when you get them if you have time. Public speaking, I wish I knew how to public speak better, but I'm working on it, so yeah. And then budgeting and scholarships, I I was terrible at budgeting. Luckily, EXITO provided some guidance with that. So if you know you struggle with this, I would meet with a finance counselor right away and get that in order. Tips and tricks: ask questions, not just how something happens, but what if and why. When you're really trying to solve something, these are really important things to do. And I would try to answer them yourself first, but then definitely go to your peers and your PI to ask for help. Networking, this has been definitely the biggest help in my career as a scholar. Just meeting people, like we just met new people we're collaborating with at OHSU. Networking is such a valuable tool, especially when you're applying to schools and if you know someone that's really helpful. Professionalism, public presence, just the way you speak, the way you dress, the way you appear, timeliness, stuff like that. Persistence. Research is really frustrating sometimes. Sometimes I'll spend 12 hours doing an experiment that doesn't help anything, so it's frustrating. And then balance is the last one. Taking time for yourself and self-care is so important. Eating well, doing whatever you do that is a stress reliever. I like to dance, meditate, socialize. Yeah, okay. That's all.
All right, so Elle did a really good job of outlining pretty much everything I was going to say, so I'll try to keep this brief. So hi everyone, my name is Dar'ya Pozhidayeva, and I just finished my junior year here at PSU, and I am in the lab of Dr. Angela Osborne at OHSU, and we are in the Department of Behavioral Neuroscience in the VA, and we study the molecular and behavioral mechanisms of drug abuse and alcohol addiction. And so that's kind of a fancy way of saying we get mice drunk and then kind of see what happens. So my RLC experience has been really awesome, really positive for the most part, but at some parts it's been really challenging. And I think that's just science in general. It's really rewarding and kind of like a unique career field to go into. And my PI and just the people, the peers that I'm with, have done a really great job of supporting me and pushing me and really helping me learn and kind of throwing me in the pool a little bit, when you don't know how to swim. But it's made me a better and more thorough researcher, but definitely don't expect things to always go perfectly or easily or naturally. Like Elle said, sometimes there will be times where you'll do an experiment for 8 hours and it's okay, that was a waste of time, or it doesn't work out, or sometimes there's nothing at all for you to do. You'll come to lab and it's okay, there's nothing for me to do. So you have to manage your time well, be organized and want it, go for it. Find your niche and find who you are as a researcher. Because what I found is that you'll encounter a lot of people who know a lot of different things. They'll be specialists in their career, or they'll have been doing something for a really long time. And it sounds really cliche, but and you'll think wow, these people know so much. At least this is how I always felt. How am I ever going to contribute anything or really add anything? They've been at this for years. But find your niche. You can contribute something. You are a unique person, and there's something that every single person can add here. You've made it. Pat yourself on the back, cut yourself some slack, and kick some butt. And some of my tips would be just really similar to Elle's. Manage your time well, be organized, check your email like a hawk. It sounds silly, but that's how everybody communicates. I didn't really know that coming into it. Have a little tagline at the bottom of your email, your little signature that says who you are, what your email is, so people know how to reach you. Be professional, definitely in the way you present yourself. And networking is a huge thing. I'm just going to echo that. And going to conferences and using your travel funds through EXITO, because sometimes you'll just get so busy and you'll be I don't have time to do this or that. But definitely try and fit that into your schedule, because conferences, especially in science and research, are huge. It's kind of the rule, not really, that people talk about, but it's definitely, you want to network, you want to meet people in your field, you want to let people know, like, hey, I'm doing this research, here's what I can add, like, I'd love to meet you, I'd love to talk to you, I love your research. So just show passion and definitely keep pushing, because there's a lot of times where I felt like, wow, I couldn't possibly contribute something. But if you keep pushing, definitely find your niche. And it's hard, but it's great and very rewarding. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to sit for this one. So I'm Travis Henke. I just graduated, actually. I'm part of the cohort 1B. So I've spent the last couple years in Dr. Stephen Shea's lab up at OHSU doing circadian rhythm research. I'm going to pull up the questions 1 second. Okay, so brief description or overview of the research. So we looked at circadian rhythms and kind of how they affected primarily cardiovascular function. The lab was a huge project. We had people come in and stay for 5 days up at OHSU in a time-controlled environment where they didn't have any access to electronics, where the windows were blacked out, they had no idea what time it was, and they were forced to be awake for 2.5 hours and sleep for 2.5 hours for 5 days straight, and subjected to a battery of tests. From that, we looked mostly at incidents of like obstructive sleep apnea and how that affects different cardiovascular function. We looked at metabolic issues that arise with people who are on a forced de-screening protocol, as it's called. Looked at a bunch of different stuff. I even looked at defecation and how it has an endogenous circadian rhythm associated with it, and how that affects the prevalence of myocardial infarction first thing in the morning. There's a link. So I had the opportunity of doing a lot of different stuff and get my hands dirty doing a lot of different, not that kind of dirty, doing a couple different things, which I really appreciated. When it comes to selecting a lab that you want to be in, I think fit is the most important. But don't just look at the PI in the lab. My lab was very big, well, relatively big for EXITO. We had 3 postdocs, and I mostly worked with the postdocs. There wasn't a whole lot of interaction with the PI. He was awesome, he was great and supportive, but he had a major administrative role at the Oregon Institute of Occupational Health. And so you really want to get to know the postdocs that are in the lab. They're probably going to most likely be your mentor if you're in a larger lab. And they're the ones who's going to try to guide you through this whole process. The second most important thing that I think is autonomy. You want to be in a lab where you are given a certain level of autonomy to kind of develop your own scholarly project. There's nothing wrong with going into a lab and doing the grunt work and running gels and doing all that stuff, but you're here to kind of get your feet wet in hypothesis-driven research, and if you're not actively doing that, it's not the lab you want to be in. You want to be able to develop your own project, because from doing that, as other people have talked about, you get the opportunity to present at conferences, do poster presentations, and if you're really lucky, a publication. I did not get a publication from my lab. Don't feel like you have to. It's not a requirement, but it's really nice when it happens. I really want to second the notion of attending conferences. Even if you're not presenting, it gives you a really good opportunity to network and learn how to actually communicate your scientific findings. I had the opportunity to travel down to Abercams in Florida a couple years ago, funded by the EXITO funding. I think we get $1,800 to travel to a conference and present. You'll probably have to use all of it because it's expensive to go to a conference, but it gave me a really awesome opportunity to present a poster, to actually meet people at graduate schools and medical schools, and kind of build that network, which is really important. About publications too, I think it's important to be in a productive lab. As I said, it's not a requirement to get, no graduate program. Well, maybe graduate schools care a little bit more, but medical schools don't. Whether or not you actually receive the publication out of your lab. But if you're really gunning for one, I would look at how productive the lab is. Take a look at the PI, see how frequently they publish, see who's on the paper, if they allow students, undergrad students or research associates to be listed as authors. My lab was a very longitudinal lab. I don't think they had a publication come out in 3 years prior to me joining, but it didn't matter. I enjoyed my time nonetheless. What I wish I would have known. So I didn't have the opportunity to actually select my lab. I got kind of thrown into it, and it actually worked out great. And I was kind of placed in there just because I wanted to go to medical school, and I'm in a clinical research lab, so it was a really good fit. I think you should also kind of keep your specific goals in mind. If you want to go to medical school, go to a clinical research lab, because that's going to count as clinical experience on top of that. And you're going to get a lot more opportunity to interact with human research subjects and kind of see how that's done. If you want to go to a basic science graduate program, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to go into clinical research. I wish I would have known more about time commitments, as Al said. Luckily, my PI was extremely flexible. I know others aren't as fortunate, but there's going to be times where you need to be able to take significant amount of time away from the lab to do things. Like summer ago, I had to take the MCAT, and my PI was helpful enough to actually give me enough time off to study for that, where I know other labs wouldn't. So I got lucky with that, but that's definitely something you want to keep in mind. I think I covered everything. There we go.
I'm short, so I gotta. Hi, I'm Kim Dolan. I was actually in cohort 1A, but I just graduated this past spring. For about the last 2.5 years, I've been working in Dr. Steve Reichheil's lab. We're down at the CLSB, so it's a Portland State lab. We work in a shared facility with Portland State and OHSU. We study membrane protein structure and function. My specific project is on gap junction cell-to-cell communication channels, putting them in these lipid nanodiscs to study them in a native lipid environment by cryo-electron microscopy. So it's really great in terms of getting a full range of experience from a lot of membrane protein biochemistry, and then there's also like a strong computational aspect, and I got to get trained on the microscopes, which are amazing. There's the size of a room, and they cost a lot of money, and they're very cool. So I feel like they've said a lot of very important things that I'm going to kind of echo and highlight a little bit. But for me, I feel very lucky because my PI is like just like a dream mentor. He's so supportive. He's very available. It's a smaller, newer lab that's been growing since I've been there. So it's just a very close, like tight-knit. Everybody has their own little areas of expertise. So there's, no matter what I encounter, there's someone in the lab that can help me, and they're all very willing to do so. What he was saying about postdocs is also true of graduate students. They spend their whole lives in the lab, so like they know how to do things, and they have answers, and they're willing to help. So I guess when you start out, you're pretty much not going to know how to do anything, and that's totally expected. And so that can be kind of like emotionally challenging. But I think the best thing to do, instead of being too down on yourself, is just to ask a lot of questions and take really good notes, and to know that everybody starts out where you did. And there's a lot of just learning how to do bench science. There's skill, and some people are just naturally good at it, and other people struggle with it even at later parts of their career. Like my PI, I think, was saying that he never was able to do PCR properly. Like he still can't, but he's an amazing scientist. So there's some things you might encounter where you're just like, I'm not good at this, but that's what you have support network around you for. Something that I would emphasize, and something that I personally struggle with, is being deliberate and organized. And that's something, those are habits you want to institute very early on, because you can really find yourself in a situation further along where like everything is a mess, and I wish I had gotten on top of this 2 years ago. So I'm kind of in the process of like tidying up my last 2 years of work before I move on to the next thing. Well, I do want to say, because he was mentioning publications, and since I do work in more basic research and just went through the process of applying to graduate school, I think getting a publication is great, and everybody should strive for that. But I really found in my tour of graduate schools that the thing that they really care about, because there is a lot of luck and timing that goes into getting a publication as an undergraduate, they care that you were involved in a project where you really understood what sort of bigger questions were being asked and why you were approaching it the way you did. That you can talk about your research in a knowledgeable way at the level of expected of someone who's about to start graduate school. So I don't have any publications. The work I'm doing right now will likely result in a publication, but I'll have already been in graduate school for like a year before that happens. So don't think that you have no future if it seems like there's no publications on the horizon for you. Those are the sorts of things that I think stressed out about, and then in retrospect realized that you're fine. This is totally normal. I mean, you're juggling school, you have to get good grades as best you can, you have your personal life, you want to be learning in the lab, you want to be reading. It's a lot. So, if you can figure out how to manage all that stuff, then you're a very strong candidate for graduate school, for medical school. So I think that would be, like she said, pat yourself on the back. You guys are doing well. I think that's it. Thank you.
Hi. My name's Alysse, and I'm a biochemistry major. I'm going into my senior year this year. And I've been working in an RLC in the neurology department at OHSU in the Epilepsy Center. And when I went into the RLC fair where we're going and meet all the prospective PIs, I didn't really know exactly what it was I wanted to get into. I came back to school for biochemistry because I was interested in neuroscience and especially things relating to mental health. And so I think one of the best pieces of advice that I got going into the RLC fair was to try to find somebody who you connected with well on an interpersonal level. And considering I didn't know exactly, I didn't have like a super strong idea of like this is what I want to do in my lab. I was more so looking at like who can I connect with and really feel comfortable with so I could explore things and get the most out of it. And so one of the very first people I talked to was Dr. Marissa Kellogg, who is an MD neurologist who specializes in epilepsy and especially mental health. So how epilepsy and mental health are related. A lot of people with epilepsy deal with depression and anxiety, and it can lead to complicated outcomes, so higher suicide rates and that sort of thing. So we really hit it off at the RLC fair, and so I decided that's where I wanted to do my work. And initially we were planning on doing, she has this giant database of inpatient data. And so the idea was to go in and look for interesting outcomes related to epilepsy and how people had the instances of anxiety and depression that go along with that, and what other the connection between epilepsy and suicide, and try to document that more because it's not something that has been very fully explored in research, but it's really important to how doctors treat their patients. And then, so as we're getting started on this at the beginning of last year, and we had the opportunity to jump in on another project that had just gotten through IRB, the Institutional Review Board, for a cannabis research project. And it took over a year to get it through because it's still Schedule I federally illegal drug, but it's been legal recreationally in Oregon since 2015. And so a lot of patients with epilepsy, I don't know if you guys know, but there's a strong connection between CBD and the treatment of epilepsy. It can really help people improve their seizure control, but there aren't a lot of options. There's only one synthetic cannabinoid that's currently available called Marinol, and it's not very commonly prescribed because it's not as effective as just smoking flower or getting a tincture or an oil and administering it that way. And so we got the chance to jump in on this project where we would just be interviewing patients who are coming through the clinic. So they have at OHSU the Epilepsy Center at the Center for Health and Healing, or is it Health and Healing? Yeah, it always seems weird to me because it's so redundant, health and healing. But so they have an epilepsy center there that attracts patients from all over the region. A lot of these people have refractory epilepsy, which means they can be on up to 7 different anti-seizure drugs and still be having seizure occurrences on a daily basis. So it's really hard to treat. And so these are ideal candidates for CBD treatment. And so they're coming through and we're just asking them a really short survey about how they were treating their seizures with CBD, how they felt like it was affecting it, what kinds of strains they were using, how they were accessing it, how they were administering it, whether they were smoking it or doing a tincture or concentrate. And this was all really relevant because just recently, a few months ago, the FDA advisory panel recommended the approval of a drug called Epidiolex, which is the first plant-based derivative of a CBD concentrate that's going to be available for prescription. And so that would be, they've recommended it for approval from the FDA. So that, as soon as it goes through, will kind of open the floodgates for CBD research as it relates to epilepsy and other sort of neurological disorders. But yeah, so we're really hoping to get a publication out of it because this is super relevant to the patients that we work with, and they've already begun to self-treat, but a lot of neurologists don't know what are the best ways to incorporate this into treatment or have a lot of research that would guide them. And so what we found and what we were doing was that a lot of patients were going into dispensaries and getting recommendations that were like they would get high THC strains instead of high CBD, whereas CBD is what is going to help them manage their seizures. But the bud tenders and themselves are choosing things that were actually THC is associated with poorer outcomes with seizure control. So here they are going in without information that might be helpful for them in treating their condition. And that's important for the doctors to know. If the patients are going in and they're self-treating and they're not getting the thing that they need to properly treat it, especially when something we don't understand cannabis very well, we don't understand epilepsy as well as we would like to, so that makes for a really complicated situation. And so we got to jump in on this and we interviewed a lot of patients in clinic, which I didn't know that I was going to be getting any sort of clinical experience, but it ended up being wonderful. I had just fantastic conversations with people where they would come in and they would start crying, talking about how CBD has so improved their seizure control that they have a much more functional life. And you know, and I'm sitting there like getting all worked up about it. And people are always in such a good mood because they love talking about smoking weed. So that was like always a fun thing to go and talk to them about. And I was surprised sometimes by the contributions that people would make to the discussion. Like there was this one woman who said, she was funny too, because she has these long fake nails and like a chest tattoo. And she's like, I keep an Excel spreadsheet with all of my prescriptions that I'm taking and the strains that I buy and how much THC and how much CBD they have. And then I keep a detailed log of how each one makes me feel. And yeah, she does this with everything, right? And I was like, that's how we should be doing research. Like, can we get like 100 more of you? But some of the challenges that we ran into is our goal was to have 100 people do this survey, and I would go into the clinic 2 days a week, and I would sit around waiting for a patient to come through. We had a bunch of doctors who were all sending their patients to us, but only so often would we actually get somebody who was using marijuana to treat their epilepsy or using it at all. And so we only ended up with about 34 people who, actually we had 35 and one of them was 19. You have to be 21 to actually use marijuana, so we had to pull that one out. IRB didn't like that. But you know, we didn't get as many people as we wanted, so the promise of that as a publication was a little bit dull. But then, you know, I have this great relationship with my PI. We have really good communication, and so we're working on a way to incorporate that into a literature review of dispensary research overall to try to fold that into something that will still be relevant and meaningful in a scientific sense, and to try to give some evidence-based solutions to epilepsy and how people can use CBD. So yeah, like they said, time management is super important. I knew going into this that this was going to be challenging, but a lot of times it is more than, you know, it's 10 hours a week in your RLC, but it can easily be more, and that easily just gets eaten up. And one thing I struggled with was my time would get so broken up because of all my school responsibilities that I didn't always get to do really nice, like, focused work. So I would be sitting around reading articles or doing patient surveys, and taking notes, but like none of that was like coalescing into something that was like a bigger project. And so that's what I'm like hoping to do this summer. But you know, I have to remind myself not to beat myself up too much about not accomplishing everything I set out to do, because you know, we're all really ambitious people. That's why you're here. And so remember that it's going to be easy to be hard on yourself about not you know, getting that publication or having more poster presentations. You know, you just gotta push yourself to get out of your comfort zone and to try something new, because that's what this is all about. And I think back on internships that I've done in the past before EXITO, and I felt like I didn't push myself enough to try things that were uncomfortable for me. So find a PI who you feel okay being vulnerable with, that you could trust, and then try things that you've never done before and really be open to being wrong and learning from those experiences, because that's how you're going to get to where you need to be. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Megan. I got placed into, well, I went to the RLC fair and talked to people. And I didn't get my first or second choice, but I got my third choice. And she's great. She actually was presenting when I walked in, and it's Dr. Jennifer Blakesley. It's a social science research. It's the Regional Research Institute over at the Market Building. And her research focuses on transition age foster youth and college success and preparation for independent living, and ways that we can improve their outcomes. Like right now, I think 3%, there's different statistics, but about 3% actually graduate from college. And like, so you have like a 3 times higher dropout rate than regular kids. So I got put on, she did put me with a project that she felt would like complement my strengths and that I would like, which is really nice. I just love her. It was a great placement. So my thing last year was to get these kids come in 3 times over the period of the year and to fill out a whole bunch of paperwork. And there's a control group which doesn't get any supports, and then there's the variable group that gets interventions and things like that to help them be successful in college. And I got to like call them, schedule their third appointment, and they get a compensation of $40. And it was a lot of autonomy, like he said, which was really good for me. And just get it done. I followed the protocols. I was trained how to do it, and getting the quantitative data entered into the computer, and then giving them their stipend. They get like a compensation, and they were really fun to talk to. It was neat to be able to talk with people, and I wasn't in a wet lab or doing hardcore. Well, I call it hardcore science, but it's a different kind of science, but still the same. Getting the information you need to make changes and hopefully implement programs and things for these kids to do better in the future and get funding for it. So this next year, I'll be doing qualitative interviews and transcribing and looking for themes throughout the different interviews, which is going to be really fun. I don't have any problems with anybody in my lab, and there's only a few of us, but I just got really lucky. I know that I had 18 years of working before this, and I can say that the best thing you can do is advocate for yourself. Just don't be afraid to ask questions like everybody else said, because you can only be prepared to receive what you're willing to ask for, but also, some people, they're not going to like offer up what you want to learn, and you have to just ask the questions you need to ask, and like she said, you can try to find the answers on your own first, but you should feel comfortable to ask, and nobody else can make you feel less than, you just have to know that you have a right to ask questions. And what else was there? My biggest challenge, honestly, I've been so lucky, my biggest challenge in the lab was knowing where my stuff that I printed out was, because it turned out it was like 4 floors below me, and I found out weeks later, like, where have I been printing all this stuff? So, yeah, that's been really nice. I love this program. This is a great scholarship, and everybody's been really supportive. I've never really seen anybody who works in the office or anywhere get mad or irritated, and yeah, it's a great place to be. Socialize, with each other. Get to know each other. You can support each other.
Hi, my name is Keeley. I am from the first cohort. I just graduated this year, and I work for the Trauma Research Lab up at OHSU. We are a very large lab. I think we might be one of the biggest labs in the RLCs. I have the chance to participate not only in clinical research, but also basic science research as well. So I get a little bit of both, which has been a really amazing experience. My research over the last year and a half has focused on the clotting cascade and looking at a specific protein and how it affects clots in your legs and your lungs after you've been traumatically injured. With trauma, patients have a 60% chance of actually developing one of those, and we would like to get a better control on that. So that's what my research focused on. I think my lab experience has been 100% amazing. I think you guys got to hear from my mentor earlier, Sam Underwood. I can't say enough about how incredibly supportive, flexible, just 100% amazing is really the only word to describe her. I think my biggest challenge for my lab was honestly imposter syndrome. Like I have a work history as well of 15 years, prior to coming into going back to school and pursuing my bachelor's degree and going on to what I hope is PA school here. So when I walked into the lab, and I work directly with the trauma surgeons and the residents up at OHSU as well as PhDs, I just felt like, how did I end up here? It was a little intimidating. But as they've all touched on, when you have amazing support, you're able to ask questions, you're able to get comfortable, and I was able to overcome that. So just know that you're here for a reason. You guys all got into this program because you're amazing and you have a lot of potential. So go into your lab knowing that you definitely have something to offer. What I wish I would have known before coming into this program is time management. I am a single mom of 3 kids. I worked full-time going through my undergrad, all 5 years of it. I also had the internship program and the EXITO commitments as well. So for me, I felt like I was in a constant juggling act, and there were many times that I wore myself out. So just remember balance. Make sure you take time for yourself, like Elle touched on. Self-care is huge, and you guys will definitely get through it, but that was definitely one thing I wish I would have known. And my biggest tip for you guys is I'm going to harp on it just like everybody else did, networking. That really is the golden key to this program. No matter what program you guys are headed to, whether it's medical school, whether it's a PhD, who you know and who supports you is an amazing thing. So really, really, really cash in on that networking. Also, don't doubt yourselves. Again, you guys are here for a reason. So congratulations for coming aboard. This is an amazing program, and it will take you many places.
Thanks, everybody. For those of you that have graduated, would you mind just sharing what you all are going to be doing post-graduation?
So I'm actually moving to Boston for medical school July 30th.
Wait, what medical school?
Wait, where are you going to school?
Harvard.
Okay.
I'll be starting a PhD in biophysics at UC Berkeley in August.
Woo!
I actually got hired on at my RLC. I was just promoted to a lead coordinator, and I will be working. I actually am taking an extra year off because I got so excited about research. I'm going to spend an extra year doing some more basic science research opportunities as well as clinical, and then PA school applications start next year.
All right. So we're going to open it up to the audience now. This is the audience. So some Q&A, questions. Carla?
So when you were doing your own work, your own research to prepare for your posters and conferences, how did you go about thinking of research questions to study?
So when you pick an RLC, you should really try to familiarize yourself with the research that the lab is currently doing. Look at the publications that they've been doing, and try to. I mean, a lot of the times, every lab I've been in, I've been kind of thrown into with no real good background information. Especially in the last one I was in with EXITO, I had nothing, like no background on circadian rhythms at all. So I think the most important thing is to just kind of like look at the literature that's out there and just try to find some gaps in it. Like, see, like, well, we looked at this one thing, but what about this other thing? And it doesn't matter how stupid the question sounds, ask your PI. Just be like, hey, I was kind of thinking like, what about this? Maybe there's a possible connection. It's just asking those questions and kind of thinking about it in an innovative way that's going to kind of help you be able to generate your own research questions, especially when you get a little bit more familiar with the material and you can actually figure out what's a little bit more feasible or not.
Also, I kind of did the opposite of you when finding a lab. I had done a ton of background research, and I went out seeking my PI because I was super interested in Alzheimer's research. And so I think we're predominantly a biochemistry lab, and familiarizing yourself with a lot of the biology and a lot of the other neuroscience stuff that your PI may not be familiar with, and bringing something to the table that your lab doesn't already have will really help form experiments and also make you an impressive student. I think for posters though, like, it's going to come naturally because it's going to be based off of the data that you've been collecting, so it's not something to be stressed out about.
Add to that really quick. I was just going to add one more thing because I had a similar experience to that where our lab is predominantly biochemistry and behavioral science, but I really went to my PI with my personal interests, and I would say definitely communicate what you want to do to your PI and work with them, because I do love biochemistry and that's my primary interest, but I was also interested in like computational science and data analysis, and so I brought that to my PI, and that was definitely my biggest project started based on that, just based on my interests in that. So don't be afraid.
I had to come up with a question just this last term when we submitted an abstract for it, but I didn't know really what to ask. It felt like it had already been covered in some of the other research they had done. But what I had was a project, a study that had been finished, and I had all of the 288 participants from around Portland, and had all of their answers of all of these different surveys. So I just kind of went through and looked at all the questions, what interested me, like about mental health, their mental health or PTSD symptoms and stuff like that, and eventually came up with something. So you can always look at what they already have done.
Also, very quickly, a couple of these guys have said you do a lot of research and things don't work out how you think they are going to. And that happened with the project that I was working on, where my hypothesis was actually the opposite of what we thought it was going to be. But with that happening, it led us to additional questions, and it gave me the opportunity to spin off and do my own kind of look into it, and give me a chance for first authorship. So even though some things don't always work out how you think they're going to, they might lead you to something else.
You want to share?
Hi, I just got a job in a research lab here at PSU, and my PI doesn't necessarily start with a hypothesis, and he's just kind of doing experiments all over, which is great. He just tells me to do an experiment, I can do it, but I would like to know, and I was just curious if any of you have experience where your PI didn't have a hypothesis necessarily, and how you navigated kind of finding one yourself.
You're in a special lab.
I guess I have kind of been working on different projects since I got in the lab, and some of them were not necessarily didn't have a clear endpoint, but I guess it would be similar to what everyone was saying about the poster question, which is really familiarize yourself with what the lab has done and has published, and kind of try to see if you can make a connection to that larger picture. Because ostensibly your PI is hoping to publish something related to what you're doing, because you're not just doing experiments for fun. So there's sort of trying to figure out what narrative what you're doing fits into. Or if there's maybe somebody who's doing similar work or using a similar approach, and what they're investigating. But yeah, and it might just be a need to just sort of understand sort of the framework that you're operating in. But yeah, that is a unique method. Yeah.
So at your stage right now, you can do the experiments, and those should generate more questions for you personally. What if I changed, I don't know what kind of research you're doing, but let's say you're doing something with cell cultures, well, what if I changed this one condition or this time point or did something else? What do I think will happen based on what I've observed already? And so any experiment you do should, in theory, generate more questions. Nothing's ever settled by a single experiment. And so look at what's happening in your experiments, even if you're not, creating your own hypothesis right now, and go from there. Any question you have can feasibly be generated into a hypothesis.
I also just wanted to add on top of that sometimes labs do preliminary studies, which are just smaller, kind of more probing versions of big, time, not wasting, but it takes a lot of time to do big research experiments with large resources and just staff and stuff like that. So maybe your PI is just kind of probing the waters, but in any way, it's always good to look at the previous work, that your PI has done, what were they looking for before, what kind of questions did they ask, so that might help clear some stuff up for you.
Hi. So we've been hearing from you guys and others how important it is to find a RLC that's a good fit for personalities as much as it is to find something that is what we're interested in. Did you have any questions in particular that you used to kind of feel that out?
Yeah, so before the RLC fair, which I think is when most of you will find your PI, it's really important to familiarize yourself with all of the research that they do and be really interested in that, and definitely have 3 solid choices. But then I think when you actually meet your principal investigator, that is when you can, I don't think you really need a specific question, but more of just a conversation to tell if your personalities mesh well. I know in my lab, I get along great with my PI, but we've had a couple of students, it was just a lot of work for them, or some things didn't work out, so they've actually found a better placement. So I think that initial conversation, or if they've presented here already, just paying attention to the way they speak, the way they talk about managing their lab, things that are going to affect you, paying attention to that is really important. I don't know if a specific question. I mean, you can always ask about, what are your time expectations, things like that.
Another thing that I would suggest asking is asking about how they structure lab meetings, how frequently they happen, and the nature of them. Are grad students presenting? Do undergrads present? And then also asking about the mentorship hierarchy in the lab. So are you going to be getting most of your time spent with the PI or graduate students? And that'll give you a good sense of how the lab operates, because every lab is different. And for some people, working in a big lab where you're primarily working with postdocs can be a great experience. For other people, they want more one-on-one coaching from the PI, but you won't know until you get in there. But with the lab meeting stuff, it's just a sense to find out how much everybody's communicating. If they do weekly lab meetings and stuff like that that'll give you a sense of, okay, these people actually talk to each other and know what's going on.
I would think about what your personal goals are, both short-term and long-term. Think about your goals for the lab, and then think about your goals in life if you want to go to graduate school or professional school, and talk to the PI or whoever is there representing the lab about those and how they can best support you in them. If your goal is just to learn how to do research, talk about that. Talk about what you hope to get out of the lab experience, and then if you want to go to graduate school, ask them. Your mentor or your PI is going to be a huge resource for you when you're applying for other programs in the future. And so you want to make sure that they're in a position to support you with that as well.
And with that being said, too, once you're placed in your RLC, you know, and maybe you don't feel like it's a great fit, don't be scared to reach out to Carlos or to Cassandra or Kay, and let them know that, hey, this is my challenge. How do I work around this? How do I make this better? Or, you know, look for, you know, is this time to look for a different fit? So just don't be scared to communicate with your EXITO staff as well, because they're there to support you, and they're amazing at it.
We got a question over here.
Hey, what's good? I was wondering how you guys were able to maintain your like non-mentor, non-cohort relationships outside of like lab and school, because I know like the previous cohorts that were like in here and talking, they said like, oh, I had no social life. I lived in my dorm like a little gremlin. So like how do you guys manage like family or like personal relationships or friends like outside of lab and school and potentially even work?
I didn't. I don't. I didn't have much of a life. I still don't.
Same. My friends know that I have like 1, maybe 2 times a week where I can hang out with people, and then but I think the important thing is to communicate to people around you. It's like, hey, I'm doing this. I have this really exciting opportunity. It's a short period of time. I know it's like 3 years seems like a really long time when you're in school, but like it goes by so fast, and you don't often get opportunities like this program. And so like try to just get them as excited about what you're doing as you are, and talk to them about your research and stuff, and then they'll be able to cut you some slack when they're like, hey, I haven't seen you in like 2 months, like what's going on? It's like, we're still friends, I'm just also furthering science right now. No, but and I think that you'll find that there are so many new and satisfying relationships that you will develop in your lab or with your peers in EXITO, and so try not to think of it so much as losing out on time with your friends and family, but like having this chance to build new relationships with people who have a lot of shared interests and values with you as a scientist, you know?
The other thing I would add real quick is to keep a very up-to-date and detailed calendar, however you like to, but I schedule everything, so my Google Calendar looks crazy, but I think that's important too. It's just so you can keep track of your time and how much, you know, understand how long things take you.
So I guess I had a different experience because I had way more free time than I knew what to do with, and I had a lot of other obligations too. I mean, this last year I was taking 21 credits a term in my lab, 10 hours a week, in 2 other labs at OHSU, involved in student organizations, and it all comes down to time management. You have more time than you realize. You just have to be really efficient with it. And so I didn't have like downtime where I was like wasting my time, but I was able to schedule everything, even social stuff, perfectly. I didn't really have a big social life because I guess I just don't have that many friends. But if I wanted to, I really could have.
He's gonna schedule make friends at Harvard.
I would say, especially if you go to PSU, it is kind of an odd place where it's a commuter school, so it's hard to meet people. But I would like join clubs, join leadership organizations. There's a lot of awesome people that go here. You just have to find them. You know, create study groups, stuff like that. It's easy to meet people if you try a little.
Sorry. Just to add to what Alice said, find people who are just as busy as you are to be friends with. That's what I found worked out the best. If you're going to date somebody who's just as busy as you are, and it'll be perfect.
That's literally what I was gonna say. Yeah, you just need people who are understanding. I think definitely because in some ways they're gonna be the ones like supporting you, and you really want them to understand. When you can't hang out, and you're literally missing for like 2 months, and people are like, "Hey, are you alive?" So yeah, definitely find the people who you want to support and want to support you. It's really important.
Okay, we got a question over here.
Oh, so I got one.
Oh, yeah. Okay. There is an RLC studying gremlins next year, so. First and foremost, thank you for that information. Second, what role did the program build play into some of you guys actually getting into those graduate programs or medical schools?
Sure. So I did EXITO and McNair, and both of them were huge for me, I think, because like I imagine a lot of you, I'm a first generation college graduate, and I had no idea about how to apply to graduate school, so I got a lot of resources through these programs. Your PI is going to be a busy person, so there's only so much they'll help you, but you need other people to help you with the applications. But also just having the financial support from these programs to be able to make science my full-time job and not have to work outside of that allowed me to actually really get in depth with my project and have real meaningful research experience, and that's really what sets you apart from other applicants. And being able to do that full-time in the summer, so you'll get the opportunity to have like a really rare and deep research background that is going to help you get in, kind of wherever you want to go.
I really want to second that financial support. There's no way I would have been able to work to support myself. Keeley's a rock star. I don't know how you were able to work and do all that. It blows my mind. And so the financial support is extremely helpful as well. There's so much professional development that takes place in EXITO that really kind of groom you to being able to be a competitive applicant for whatever program you're trying to apply for. I think that was a huge bonus. But even just inherently being in this program is a huge benefit for you when it comes time to apply to whatever kind of program you're in. It was a big talking point in all my medical school interviews. They wanted to know what the program was. They wanted to know what your involvement was. What did you contribute to your lab? Stuff like that. And being able to articulate that and articulate your experience about just being a member of EXITO will carry you a long way as well.
I just forgot.
Okay. Got a question over here.
So I sort of have a multi-part question. Feel free to answer like part of it or all or whatever you feel like. Some of you talked about like working on your own projects in your RLC. So I was kind of curious, like your own personal projects. How did that relate to the research that was already being done? At what point did you feel like you had the knowledge and experience to be able to start working on your own project? And were given like the autonomy to be able to do that aside from your work directly with for your PI. And how did you sort of work that into your schedule? Was that part of your like 10 hours per week that you did, or was that something you had to set extra time aside for?
For the last year and a half is when I've kind of had my own project. Everything I needed to learn to do this was experience that I gained working with a graduate student on their project, helping out, and then my thing sort of spun off from that. By that time, I was working a lot more than 10 hours a week in the lab, and that's kind of, at least for the stuff that I do, a little bit necessary because there's protein purification and stuff like that. Those are 8-hour days, so and that's only just the getting things started part. So I think it depends, but yeah, it was basically like gaining experience working on a different project, and then eventually I had the tools to, when I had this other area of inquiry that was kind of adjacent to it, to do that on my own and sort of develop something separate from that.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like that in every RLC. I know that my PI kind of came to me with that. I like to give people their own kind of baby, she called it, and so that was kind of neat. And I was meeting people where they were at sometimes when they couldn't make it down to the the office, so I was just counting the drive time and stuff like that into my hours, and it was kind of nice for me sometimes to meet somebody and be with them somewhere else rather than come all the way down here. And yeah, so that's really, and it did kind of work into what I was interested in because I am going into social work, so just her whole lab was already able to, you know, feed that. But then also one of my classes I had to do a group project on foster care, so that was kind of cool because she actually helped me with a lot of the information and stuff.
I think for me, it was when I did my summer, my 300 hours in summer, is because I pretty much dedicated all of my time. I did 40 hours a week of just EXITO hours in my lab, and I ran all the assays for 9 different time points for 300 patients and analyzed all the data with a statistician. So I think that's when I really felt like it became my project. I had been part of collecting all the data and consenting and all of that the previous couple of quarters, but that's kind of when I felt it was, I knew it, and I really knew it at that point.
So I have a couple different experiences with this because I've done the clinical research in EXITO, but I also did some immunology research in a summer program on the other side of the country a couple years ago, where I worked in the lab for 80 hours a week, no joke. And so on both instances, I kind of just did my own project, but the experiences were extremely different because of the nature of the research. So when I was doing the immunology research, it wasn't a big deal to be able to set up an assay, an ELISA, do something, you know, harvest some cells and stimulate them with some sort of condition on my own, but it was much more time intensive because it requires you to show up in the lab at 2 in the morning because your cell culture is done and you got to wash them, or, you know, you're kind of at the mercy of your time points you have to hit. And you're also at the mercy of the funding that the lab receives. You know, if you're in a basic science lab, you might not be given as much autonomy to just run off and waste a bunch of reagents on some experiments that might not work. You know, it's just not feasible. But in the clinical research lab, you don't really have the same kind of ability to just create a new idea or a new question and investigate it. It's a lot more time consuming. You have to recruit participants. You have to deal with the IRB because you're working with human subjects. And so in cases like that, I found that using data that was already collected and using that to generate a hypothesis and investigating that further was much easier. I didn't have to be in the lab 80 hours a week to significantly contribute to the lab because I could move at my own pace, right? And so if you're in a position like that where you can actually go through data that's already been collected, do some different kind of analysis on it to you know, test a hypothesis, then you're in a much better position with the 10-hour-a-week commitment. But the reality is 10 hours a week, not really that enough time to be able to be a very productive member in your lab. And so you might find that you do have to work a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm just going to basically second that. That I ended up, and I think this is a lot of people's experience, that you get really wrapped up. And if you enjoy the research, it kind of happens where you end up spending more time in the lab than you want or you need, I don't know. But I had... my project also came from an existing data set, and I think that's a really good point, is for the first few months that I was in my RLC, it was just kind of doing grunt work-ish, just learning about what the lab had done before, why they had done it, and what we were doing. And eventually, through meetings with my PI, I just talked about my interests with her and what I wanted to do, where I want to take my career forward. And so I was able to find an existing data set for gene expression with RNA-seq that we had already had, and it hadn't been analyzed yet. And so I kind of, after kind of working up and gaining the trust of my PI and my lab and showing, you know, like, I can do this, I'm committed to this, it kind of was a natural next step for me to have my own project. But every lab is different. And one more thing I will say, that if you don't know what the IRB is, or if you hate doing paperwork, it's good to start that ahead of time, and just in research, like, be familiar with the IRB, especially if you plan to have your own research projects, and that's huge. They are very meticulous and very frustrating. So, yeah.
Okay, we got a question in the back.
Hello. I don't know if my question is as cool as some of the other questions, but one of the things that I'm kind of like worried about is commuting. I live kind of far, and I don't have a car. But my housing is familiar and stable. But on the other hand, if I was on campus, I could walk everywhere. And also, the utilities are included, so in the wintertime, I could have the heat on as high as I want. So these are like some of the things that I'm kind of battling with. I don't know if you guys have any advice for that.
I live down on the waterfront because it was so convenient to just take the tram up to OHSU. I guess it really depends on your placement, where you're going to be, but it was invaluable. It was a lot of money, more than I really had. I had to really budget myself to be able to do that, but the convenience of just being able to go up to my lab or just go to school, it was worth it for me. I realize not everybody's in a position like that, and so your mileage will vary definitely, but the convenience factor is something definitely worth considering.
I live in Northeast Portland, so pretty far from campus, and I also work about 30 hours a week at a job outside of this and school and everything. So when I was getting my RLC placement, I made sure to ask them about how flexible it was going to be. So like I would go into the clinic a couple days a week, but the rest of my work was done kind of on my own time, and she was very flexible about that. And I knew going into it that was something that was going to be necessary for me to be successful. And so I think that that's something to really consider when you're going into the RLC fair, which can be kind of unfortunate if you were really interested in, going and being in like some genetics lab and they needed you there like every day. That then might limit your possibilities. But I think most of the PIs have some flexibility and are willing to work with you as best that they can to make it work for you. So that's just like a conversation that you can have with them.
I come from Oregon City, and it takes a long time every day, so I just park at the Max. But you can get a lot of reading done. That's what I used it for. I'm one of the only people that does the reading.
I commute from Vancouver, Washington, and so that's actually been a huge challenge for me. Luckily, my PI, well, not my PI, but my lab manager has been extremely flexible with my schedule, especially with my kids. And I mean, I have to be at certain places, like at daycare at certain times to pick them up in schools and stuff like that. So she's also been able to set me up with like access at home, so I can do things from home. So that's an option. Also, TriMet, when you're commuting from that far, the Max and stuff is really kind of your friend, because parking's super expensive down here.
Mine was really flexible too. I just came on days when I was already here.
And what's really cool is if you end up at OHSU, I think a TriMet pass for the entire year is only like $70. Yes. Take advantage of that, because I rely on public transportation too, and that thing is huge.
Or if you don't work there, if you volunteer 4 hours a week, you get one for like $30, which is what I do. I lived on campus off campus last year, and I just moved back onto campus, and I love it. I get a lot more sleep, and I'm definitely less stressed out. But if you're in a position where you don't have to pay rent, which I wasn't, I was always going to have to pay rent, I would say, try to save the money, because it is so expensive to live downtown. But it is very convenient if you can afford it, so, yeah.
We got a question here in the back.
Sorry, I've never held a microphone in my life. So if you were to summarize your Build EXITO experience or undergrad experience into one distinct memory, or like a favorite memory in general, what would that be? And yeah, or any story. I like stories, so.
I think I just went to a conference in New Orleans for the American Chemistry Society, and that was the most incredible experience. I don't really travel much for fun anyways, and so getting to travel for work I felt so cool and professional. And it's also great exposure. You meet so many cool people in the field, and we got to go to New Orleans. So I highly recommend finding conferences that are in good locations, because you do have free time to explore cities and stuff like that. So that yeah, that conference was. And I got to highlight the hard work that I'd been doing for so long, it felt really good, so.
I don't think I have a specific story or instance, but in general, I would say, going to conferences as well. I'm going to a conference in November, and it's a really big one in California for neuroscience. And it's just meeting people and feeling like you're a part of the community is very surreal. That definitely changed my life in major ways, and it was because of Build EXITO and also McNair as well. I just never thought that I would become an actual scientist or a researcher, and it's pretty amazing. Yeah, I would say that's the most significant effect that this program has had on my life and like self-perception.
So I enjoyed conferences as well, but I think my favorite part was actually presenting at the Build EXITO Symposium. It's just different because you're there with your peers and you hear bits and pieces of everybody's research and what's happening in your cohort. And not only does it give you the opportunity to really kind of present your research that you've been working on and kind of demonstrate, that you've actually been here doing something this whole time. But you get to hear about what everybody else is working on, and all the labs are awesome, and it was really cool to be able to see all the great research that my peers were doing. And so I really like that aspect.
For me, I did the first 2 years at community college and then transferred in, and I, like a lot of people here, am kind of a later returning student, so I just didn't really know anyone here when I started EXITO, and I got such a great community of people that made me feel like, just people I see all around campus that I know from this program and from McNair, that they're all doing very different, very cool things, and it was just created all of these great familiar faces around. And I think the program, the orientation week for me was really inspiring. Like, I don't think that I would have applied to graduate school. I'm not sure if I would have, but definitely like after that, it really kind of transformed my idea of like what my career in science could look like. And then I just continued to get to meet all these cool people that could help me make that a reality. So it was just kind of the whole thing, I guess. It was pretty good.
Yeah, I would say ditto. For me, I'm a post-bac, so I already have a bachelor's degree, and I'm getting a second one now. And so I'm older than some of the students in my classes, so I didn't know people coming into it. And so EXITO, it was so nice to have so many people around who had similar career goals and interests, and similarly, the orientation week, I remember just leaving feeling like so good and like so like I had just joined this really great community, and it was such like a happy feeling. And I would say, other than that, like the other thing that really sticks out is like a great memory that I've had so far, and I still have 1 more year to go. But doing my first poster presentation at OHSU's Research Week, because when I first started my biochemistry program, I was like, I don't know if I should be doing this. I don't know if I'm smart enough. Am I supposed to be here? And EXITO really helps us to feel like our perspective is valuable and that we can do this. And I really believe that now. If like this is something you want to do, then you can. And it's so meaningful to be part of a community where that is like a fundamental value that everybody shares.
I agree with what you said, though.
I just think this whole experience and looking back on the personal growth that I've had over the last 2 years is just pretty amazing. I mean, it's just incredible to me. Like I said, I suffered with imposter syndrome, so like kind of coming through that and getting to the point where I feel like I found my place in my lab, I think is probably one of the best feelings and memories.
We got a question back here. I thought one of you was going to say like meeting with their advisor, but nobody said that. I know, that's true.
Hello. So, as a first-generation college student, I know there was times for my first year of college where I lost motivation to even be in college. Was there a time in your life during like your schooling or your research where you lost motivation, and what did you do to like keep on going, be where you're at right now?
I also went to junior college for the first 2 years and then transferred into PSU. My junior college was a very community, I mean, it was very community based. Like, you knew your professors, you knew the people on campus very well. So when I transferred here, it was huge. And I am older, and a lot of the people in my classes were younger. I didn't feel a lot of connection. I struggled with the time management and the balance. So my first quarter, I almost felt was just kind of like a disaster. I ended up in Charles Daniels' office, who was the former Carlos, and I was like bawling. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I can't do this. I can't with everything going on. So yes, absolutely, there are definitely times. But what's so cool about this program and the networking and the people that you meet and you have to support you is they pull you up out of that and they push you through it. So then you get like this empowerment of, I've got this, I can do this, and I am going to do this. And you do.
So I actually dropped out of Portland State 14 years ago. I'm a first generation college student. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. Like, I didn't even know, I don't even know how I even got into Portland State, to be honest. I don't even remember applying. I did it apparently, but there wasn't any support. And I think that was the hugest part. I mean, Keeley already said it, but having a support network is crucial. I think that's one thing that EXITO really provides. And if you feel like you're just not getting enough of it, there's always other student organizations that you can meet people, because everybody's lost motivation at some point. And it took me 14 or, well, I guess 12 years to actually figure out what it was I wanted. And if there was a program like this that existed that kind of guided me to find a path, then I probably would have stuck around in school. But I'm glad I didn't. It worked out for the best.
I also had a pretty kind of bumpy ride in college trying to decide what I want to do. I am a first generation college student also, and my parents are both immigrants from Russia. And just in general, my parents don't really speak English. It's always been growing up, oh, they're eating weird food and acting weird. I don't invite anybody over, because I was kind of embarrassed. And yeah, that's really real. That made it really difficult for me to try and figure out the education system, or trying to navigate my way through school without my parents' help. They don't know what to do, they don't know where to go. I didn't feel like there was many people that could have helped me. And so fresh out of high school and the first few years of college, I went to a community college, which helped, but it was still really difficult because I didn't really know what I wanted to do or what was really going on. And so it wasn't until I started to really kind of explore what I like to do and why I wanted to do it, and kind of not be scared. I think that's really difficult, especially I'm sure all of us here know, because you're in EXITO, there's something that's gotten in your way and you really have to fight through it to kind of make it where you want to be. And that's definitely just be brave and just keep pushing through and keep working at who you want to be and what you want to do, because you'll be surprised. I'm very surprised about how much has changed. And now I have a younger brother and sister, and so now I'm you don't have an excuse. You're gonna go to college, and I'm gonna, I know now, I can help them. I know what to do and how to apply and stuff, and so that's been really great. And I would just say keep pushing, definitely.
Yeah, I would also say I'm not a first generation, so I did have my mom was a great support network, but I think I had the opposite problem where I would just push too hard and then get super burnt out, and it was awful. I'd get super sick a lot. So I think, again, the self-care thing, really do push yourself to accomplish, get good grades, but then take some time and, really treat yourself, love yourself, because at the end of the day, you're going to have supporters, but you have to be there for yourself too. Yeah.
I'm not a first generation college student, but I do feel like I'll push myself really hard and feel like I have to do everything perfectly. And I remember there was one term where it was just a lot of stuff going on, taking physics and organic chemistry for the first time, and I got C's in all my classes, and it never happened to me in my life, and that was it almost ruined me, because I was just well, how can I keep doing this after getting a C? Oh my god. But I think that coming back from that and just getting over it and just being yeah, that wasn't a great term, and I can see a lot of things that weren't my fault or were out of my control. I can see things that were in my control that I could have done differently. And I think that like one of my favorite panels that we've done in the EXITO workshops has been the grad school rejection panel, where we had a bunch of people who got rejected from medical school. Some of them like 3 times rejected from medical school, but we're now, you know, first or second year medical students. And, you know, they had people around them who were like, you know, maybe medical school is not such a great idea. You know, you seem to be having a hard time getting in. And they're like, you know, I'm so glad that I didn't let anybody convince me not to do that, because now I am in medical school and I'm pursuing my dream. And once I become a doctor, I'm not even going to remember that this was a problem at one time in my life, because the only thing you're going to remember is the accomplishment that you were able to achieve at the end.
Sorry, I'm a little nervous. So on your journey as a Build EXITO scholar, did you at some point have to discard a part of what you were or who you were before you were on the program? Like, for example, while we all do have a passion in research and want to help our communities, some of us might have passions in different things that are not related to science, like at all. Something like art or music or anything else that's important to our lives or to who we are. So I guess my biggest concern is that I might not have time to develop myself creatively or personally amidst the craziness of, you know, taking 20 credits per term or thinking about how broke I am. Yeah, I don't even go here yet, and I feel like I'm in debt already. So yeah, did you have to let go of something to fully devote yourself to your research, and was it good or bad?
I like to do beading, and I could spend hours doing that, and I haven't let go of it. I just slowed it down, and you know, you gotta just prioritize. You don't have to get rid of things you love in your life.
Being a mom was a huge struggle for me because that was my biggest identity prior to coming back to college. And so I really struggled with, I felt like I wasn't being 100% of a mom. Like I was more focused on my career goals and my pathways, even though I knew that I was doing it in the greater good for my children. So I think the best thing ever was when we had family graduation a couple weeks ago at PSU, and my children got to walk across the stage with me in gowns and caps, and they got tassels, and they were recognized for the sacrifices that they made. And on the way home, they got to keep their tassels, and my youngest daughter, held it up, and she says, "Hey, Mom, how many of these can I have?" And I said, "You can have as many as you want." So even though I felt like I gave up like part of being a mom, I think I was still being there, and in the end, it made me a better mom. So whether it's creativity that you're worried about giving up, or whatever it is, I think that this process and this growth that you're going to go through will help you do even more there too.
So I would actually argue that you want to do everything in your power to hold on to those passions. I think, as Elle said, self-care is so understated and so important in this whole process, because you are going to be busy, and that's the reality, and there are times where you're going to be stressed out. And if any sort of creative outlet is the way you kind of cope with that and is your identity and part of you, then you do not want to give that up whatsoever. You just got to manage your time a little bit more. And even then, like, I think if you have some sort of artistic passion, that's super important in research. The lines between science and art are so blurred, and we just don't even really understand just the intersectionality between those two. It can really benefit you, give you a different perspective than other people in your lab, and have that diversity of experience that labs appreciate, that graduate and professional schools appreciate, and that are going to allow you to come up with some out-of-the-box ideas. So keep doing what you're doing.
My number one passion in life is sleeping, and yeah, and so for me, I have this like cutoff point where I really stick to, like, I'm not going to be studying or working on homework past X o'clock on any night, and I do that so I get to spend time with my husband, and I get to go to bed at a reasonable hour and get 7 or 8 hours, and that's been really important for me to like stay happy and healthy and be busy when that comes into time management. But like if there's something that, like he was saying, that is like important for your emotional well-being, just like, you know, set boundaries with the other stuff in your life.
Oh, yeah, me again. Sorry. 2 questions. First one may sound a bit like crude, but like, how has the money from Build EXITO helped you guys throughout your undergrad, or you know, what else have you done? And 2, like, how are you guys doing? Because y'all seem like you went through a lot within the last like 3 years, and like just like how you guys are doing right now, and just how you feel like your life is gonna go.
I guess I want to answer that second question because
She's not going to bill your insurance. Don't worry.
the money was huge. It helped me to like continue to pay my bills and do science only. But to your second question, this has been the best year of my entire life. Like I'm so happy. So I don't know. I mean, I think it was like hard work, but I feel. I don't know. I feel like the imposter syndrome thing. I don't know that I've ever like felt really proud of myself before, and like I think that getting to like finish everything and like set really ambitious goals and then achieve them, it's like I don't know, it's been awesome. So I actually like I enjoy the work. I really liked being busy and having like feeling like I had something to do that I was like excited and passionate about. So like it was exhausting, and sometimes I didn't get to sleep as much as I would like to, but otherwise, I mean, I think it was a really awesome journey. So I hope that we weren't coming across as like too run down and haggard, because it's not true.
Yeah, I want to second that. This has actually been like the best year of my life. Being EXO was good. It was awesome. Being done with it was even more awesome because, and not because it was arduous or inconvenience, but because you really do kind of see how far you've come in the process, and while you do struggle a little bit, you become a better person for it. So I feel great. As far as the financial stuff, I wouldn't have been able to afford school otherwise. The cool thing is, and if there's one piece of advice I could give you about financial stuff in school, apply to as many scholarships as you can. I mean, we get amazing funding through EXITO, and it paid my rent every month. But I also relied on other scholarships, and everybody here is more than eligible to get a scholarship. I'm always shocked at the amount of people who just don't bother applying because they don't think they have a chance or they don't know about it. And the cool thing is, the more you do with EXITO and the more you do in your labs, the more you build your CV and the more competitive of an applicant you become for all sorts of things. And you should always be trying to build that CV, and you can also do that by applying for scholarships. And you might get scholarships easier just inherently by being part of something like this. So do that.
We got one more question. I'm going to try to sneak it in real quick, if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't go to PSU yet, but I was able to watch your symposium recently, and then I actually remember like it's the circadian rhythm guy. So I was like, oh, you guys made an impression on me. So I was wondering, what do you guys have on like advice on the new cohorts, like how to make an impression with your research?
I think at least when I talk to somebody like Travis or like any of my peers who do really great research, what always makes an impression on me is how thoroughly they understand and really have immersed themselves in what they're doing. Because when you're knowledgeable about something and you talk about it and you really can just like dig into it with someone, they can feel that. And I think that was something during the poster presentations at OHSU's Research Week. Like there are MDs and PhDs walking around talking to you about your work, and like I could tell as soon as I started talking to one of them, and once I started really getting on a roll and being like, oh well, let me tell you about like how we got into doing this project to begin with, and here's all the background, and then really seeing their eyes light up and them getting drawn in because they want to see you excited about it. And so that excitement that you bring to your work is what will draw in other people.
I also just want to add to that and say that it's important to be able to communicate your research and your work to a wide audience of people. Like you can get really detailed and specific with some people, but for others, you need to really give them like, here's the short and sweet, or like, here's what I'm trying to do with this. And that can be kind of hard. Like my PI once told me, she's like, yeah, you have to like describe topological like mapping without using math or linear algebra. And I was like, oh, or without any sort of jargon, and that can be really difficult. But it's also a good thing to keep in mind when you're doing your own projects and talking to people, networking, things like that.
Yeah, I would say another thing, your research can be incredible, but the way you present it can really make that difference. Some people's projects I wouldn't have been previously interested in, but they presented it in such an enticing manner that I was interested. So learning how to speak eloquently about your research and public speaking, I sucked at it. I would have been like stuttering and so nervous, but I think asking your PI or telling them, I need help with this or I want to work on this is really important, because then they'll push you to practice things like that.
All right, so we're gonna have to cut this off, even though we could go for another hour, right? Probably? Yeah, okay. All right, guys. Let's give him a hand. Thank you so much for doing this.